I'm a first-generation college student. When I went off to college, my mom, I remember her saying, I don't know if anybody in the family is smart enough to make it at college, but if anybody can, Todd can. So I left with that kind of pressure. Once I got to school, I was going to be a criminal justice major. That's what I decided I want to be. And after I didn't know how to pick classes, so what I had to do is figure out how do you select classes. And I didn't know you were supposed to ask for any help. I never had in high school. You just pick your classes, and I couldn't call my family. They didn't know anything about college, so I just did it myself, looked through the book. Took Introduction to Criminal Justice because as a criminal justice major, that makes sense. Then it said you have to have a math course, so I signed up for calculus. Said you had to have a science course, so I took physics. Said you have to have a lab course, and I thought, well, there's no way they're going to let you double dip on a lab course because physics had a lab, so I took chemistry just to be sure. And then I had to have a social science, so I took intro psych. So I got my books, and I was so excited, although it cost like $100 for books. But I had my my chemistry, my physics, my calculus, my psych class, and my criminal justice class. I didn't see many of my criminal justice friends in my other classes, which is weird. But I got my first grade back, or one of my very first grades I'll never forget, was chemistry, and I got an F-. And I didn't really know what an F-. was, so I actually went to the professor and said, excuse me, professor, I don't understand this F-. And he said something akin to, given you received an F-, it doesn't surprise me you failed to comprehend it. And I thought right at that moment, I thought, gosh, I was like 17 years old, but I remember thinking I would never treat someone like that. So it kind of launched, I'm going to come back to it real quickly, a whole chunk of my career where I treat students in a different way, I think, than a lot of people, and probably not unlike a lot of you, but for some folks, they get kind of harsh about students. There's certain things I like to play around with. I'll come right back to that one, though. So, finished my degree in the end. I ended up switching over to a psychology degree along the way. Got my degree done, then I went off and got a master's degree. I got a PhD. I can remember my family was really, really proud of me up through the master's degree. Then they just wanted to know when I was going to get a job. And I got my PhD done. I got a job out at Southern Oregon, got tenured, got promoted to associate professor. My mom was so excited. Oh, you're a doctor now. This is so cool. You can write prescriptions and everything. And I said, no, I'm not that kind of doctor. In fact, she says, so are you a real doctor? I remember this one too. And I said, of course I'm a real doctor. I'm not a physician. So that does not play well in the medical school at all. Finished my degree, though, got that job out in Oregon, and I rescinded tenure and started doing faculty development. Built a faculty development center at Southern Oregon while I was there, then in Central Michigan, and now at UNC. The best part of UNC, though, and I'm wrapping up here, applied for the job because a friend of mine called and said, you got to apply for the job down here. I'm thinking, a first-generation college student, I got imposter syndrome. Any of you doesn't know what imposter syndrome is? It's basically you just figure out that sooner or later someone's going to determine that you don't know what you're doing, and then you're going to be in trouble, but until then, you kind of just do the best you can. Have that, first generation, all this other stuff, they're never going to hire me. I apply for the job. They called me and offered me the position, 3,000 faculty members, and I'm running the whole show. And I turned to my wife. We've now been married for a little over 30 years. And I said, honey, they just offered me the job as a faculty development director at UNC Chapel Hill. And she said, only in America could you get a job teaching teachers how to teach at a school you could never have gotten into. So that was cool. Then after doing that for 4 years, I moved over to the medical school. So now I'm doing faculty development in a medical school I could never have gotten into, at a school I could never have gotten into, in the Department of Family Medicine as an industrial psychologist, and I still can't write a prescription. So it's been a bizarre journey. So that said, so I like to take 3 or 4 minutes, that whole journey behind you. Now, launching forward. So here's one of the things that's happened to me. Because I like to watch students and see what's going on, I consider myself to be a teacher all the time. So if a student happens, remember the F-, thing, if a student happens to come up to me and says, hey, Dr. Z, missed class on Monday, or I couldn't make it to class Monday, did I miss anything? Okay, you all know the responses to those kinds of things, right? Of course you didn't miss anything. Without you there, how could learning even happen? Of course you didn't miss anything. We were so mourning your absence that we couldn't even comprehend the content of the material. There's all of these things. A friend of mine got a phone message one time. He said, Todd, you got to listen to this. And the message was, hey, Dr. Murray, missed the exam on Monday. Give me a call. We'll schedule a retake. And then click. And I thought, how rude she didn't leave a phone number. But the concept there is now when a student says that to me, I do not have those snippy little thoughts. I take those as teaching opportunities. And what I would say to a student now, in fact, I've done this before, a student says, hey, did I miss anything in class on Monday? I'd say, before we proceed, the way I heard what you just said was, did we happen to do anything on Monday that was important? Is that what you meant? And I can tell you, I've actually done it several times, and the students never say, Never, ever, ever. Most common response is they actually look at me and they'll say, no, I didn't mean that at all. I'll say, okay, take a breath. Don't worry about it. That's okay. Take a breath. Think for just like 5 seconds and then ask me again. And the really good ones after about 5 seconds will say, okay, is there anything in particular that was covered on Monday that I should make sure I'm ready for when the class starts on Wednesday? Say, that's a better question. And if a student can leave asking that kind of question, that means they leave the university asking better questions and thinking through what their actions are. So I like to play around with that. So if you have any of those situations where a student asks you something or does something, you think, of all the unmitigated gall, just stop and think, maybe they didn't mean that. Maybe they meant something totally else. So that's the first thing, and that's how I kind of play around with student stuff. Now, icebreakers. There's some really good research out there that icebreakers actually are not a good idea unless they pertain to the content of the material. If you only have so much time, why would you not? So I have a quick icebreaker in here, and I'll show you how I tie it into my classes. So here's your quick icebreaker. Oops. Think of something, and I got to move because I can't stand still very much up there behind that thing. Think of something that you feel that you do really, really well. So just think about this for a second. But I'm going to handicap it just a little bit. It can't be anything related to academics. So it cannot be, I teach really well, or I facilitate fabulous conversations amongst my students, or I bring together my colleagues and I'm very good at bringing about a course of action. Oh, or my absolute favorite, somebody said one time, I'm a really good committee chair. As a presenter, I have some responsibility, and with administrators in the room, one of the things you never want to do is have a faculty member identify themselves as a good committee chair because the administrator was sitting there going, oh, this is great. I want those people. Okay, so think of something you do really, really well. Okay, could be baking, could be skiing, could be surfing, I don't know. Something you do really, really well. Now, once you get something in your head that you do really, really well, think of some aspect of it that is pretty technical, not something an average person could do. So I use the quick example to make sure we're all on the same page. If you're a photographer, you have learned some things about apertures and f-stops and different bracketing techniques that if I take pictures, I might take pretty good pictures. I'm not a photographer. Somebody who paints, it isn't just painting. There's something about painting that's pretty amazing. Okay, you got that thing? Now we have to move kind of quickly because we don't have a whole lot of time, but the next task is not the whole table. If you got only 3 people at your table, the 3 of you definitely share, but if you got more than 3, try to do groups of 2 ideally. If you're all by yourself, you just think about it. You could slide right over here where there's 3 people and it'll work out perfectly. All right, so have a quick 30 seconds or so. Share with your neighbor what it is that you're really good at. Okay, do that real quickly. All right, let's see what kind of stuff you came up with. Moving kind of quickly here. So, who just heard something they thought was a pretty cool thing? Not what you've done, what you've just heard, which is a pretty neat thing. Yes?
Margaret, who I've worked with for a while, told me about her garden in her backyard.
Gardening. Excellent. Good. Gardening. Good, good, good. Okay, others? So we got a gardener. What else we have? Yes? A photographer. Good. So gardening, photographer. Yes? Troubleshooting problems. Very good. We'll keep that one in mind. There's a good person to watch.
Computer problems in his head, though, before he goes to the computer.
Excellent. So troubleshooting computer problems. That's a good one. Couple more. Yes? Baking. Okay, excellent with baking. Yes?
Karina said manipulating her children.
Manipulating children. See, these are great tasks. So if you... No, I think this is fabulous. And by the way, as you go through life, you'll find out that when you have grandchildren, it's fabulous because you have so much experience. And then when you really mess something up, you just give them back to the parents. It's perfect, but manipulating kids are great. By the way, that's why psychologists have children. No IRB committees. So, if you think about it, that's pretty handy. All right, just a couple of more quick ones. Somebody over in here, what's another task? Yes?
That one that builds computers.
Builds computers, that's excellent. All right, just two more. Two more, and we're done here. Yes? Oh, handwriting, like calligraphy? Okay, that's just one. Okay, that's one form of it. Yes, and one more. A kayaker. Oh, excellent. Very, very good. All right. So I'm going to stop with that, but you've heard some wonderful, wonderful things in a room. I actually like to start classes with this because one of the things is it's really easy. Everybody has something that they've done that they can talk about. But the real reason I like to do that is that where that came from. You see, the cool part is nobody is born with those things. You're not just born being a photographer or a gardener or a kayaker or a problem solver or whatever else you came up with. You actually had to work at those things, right? And so that concept of working towards something is really, really important. See, we have, and I'll try to get this a little bit. I'm not sure how far I'm exactly going to make it and which direction we go. It depends on you. But this concept of mindsets where people will say, oh, I don't do math. And if a person says, oh, I don't do math, that comes across a little bit like I'm not willing to put any energy into a mathematically related problem because it's not something I tend to be good at. That's how I hear it. But the issue from the student side or from the individual side is there's an entity out there that's mathematics and I can't do it. Well, the truth of the matter is you can't do anything unless you work at it. There's nothing you can do without energy. The difference is you start putting energy into certain things, you're successful at it, you identify which things you enjoy doing and not enjoy doing. By the way, huge correlation between success and enjoying. If somebody tried to teach you gardening and all of your plants died in the first 3 weeks, it's unlikely you would say, but this is so much fun. You'd say, I'm not a gardener. And then you'd move to something else if that's what you happen to do. And so later in life, you get to the point where you say, oh, this is what I do. I'm just like that. I just do it. I just solve problems. You don't just solve problems. You work at solving problems. So the point here of getting better at things by working at things is hugely important. Otherwise, you become a person who experiences. And experience can help you, but experience alone doesn't make us better. Dewey, Brookfield, several people have said actually getting better at things is the process of reflecting on experience, not just experiencing. So with students in the classroom, it's not okay to just experience the things. It's not okay to just to do the math problems. It's not okay just to answer the questions. You have to reflect on why. And there's some really good research out about this, by the way. When you have your students doing the work in any of your disciplines, any discipline, always be asking the questions of what was I going for when I ask you these questions? I love to teach statistics. I ask you 4 variability questions, and the last question would be, why did I ask you these 4? And you can't just say, well, because you want me to get better at it. No, you can't get better at it by just doing it. You have to think about it. Why these 4? And if you happen to answer, well, you messed around a little bit with the range and a little bit with the sample size on these, as I looked at these, they look like they got different ranges and sample sizes. And then I could see what the impact was on variability. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. I don't get that a lot as an answer, but that's what I'm going for. Why would I have you solve a problem or look at something about classical conditioning? You can answer that. But when you answer why, the student says, why did you as an instructor ask me to do this? You start thinking about the process. The other thing you can ask them is, why is this important? These are application issues. You can't just teach knowledge and have people apply things. But if you start asking those, why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? What would you like to do next? Those are thinking things. Otherwise, you're just experiencing. The reason this is important, Dan Willingham wrote in a book, Why Students Don't Like School, one of my favorite books out there. You could drive for 20 years and not get any better at driving. Most people, you're not a significantly better driver probably than you were 6 months ago unless you just got your license, because we drive, but we don't work at driving. If you really wanted to get better at driving, you would actually work at driving like professional drivers actually do. So just driving is driving. If you work at it, you suddenly get better so that you can feel the car and what it does. When I was young, a long time ago, my father, after a fresh snowstorm, I had had my license for just a couple of months, took me to a Montgomery Ward parking lot at about 6 o'clock in the morning while it was totally empty, and he says, okay, let's go work at driving on snow. It had just snowed. So my first lesson, he says, stomp on the gas, just floor it. I said, whoa, I don't know. He said, just do it. I floored it. You know how fast I started to move? Almost 0. Turns out if you just floor a vehicle when there's a fresh coat of snow out there, your wheels go, and if it happens to be a standard transmission, you tack the thing out, you can blow the engine, but probably not in that short period of time. But it's not safe to do that for very long, but you don't really move. Start driving along and pull the emergency brake. Turn the wheel to the left, pull the emergency brake. Start again, drive down and hit the brake instead of the emergency brake. How does your emergency brake affect the back end of your car relative to the foot brake? If you don't actually go out and work at it, you don't know, even though we drive every day. If you're on a gravel road and your car starts to swerve and you stomp on the brake, what happens to your car? If you pull the emergency brake, what happens to the car? If you don't work at it, you don't know. In school, you can't just be here. You have to work at this stuff. So if I baked for 20 years, my cakes would always look like that. I'm never just going to spontaneously make this one. That is something that would require some work. If I draw, I still love, one time I drew, whoops, I skipped ahead there, you can see where we're heading. I drew one time and it was great. It was Seligman and it was this learned helplessness thing, and I wanted to draw a little dog in the shuttle box, and one of my students says, oh, what a cute little monkey. I said, it's not a monkey, it's a dog. And she said, with that tail? And so I changed the tail, and she said, oh, what a cute little monkey without a tail. Just mean students. But the concept is getting better at drawing. Some people will say, I don't draw. There's actually classes out there now which are really pretty cool. They're how to draw classes for professionals. And what they'll do is you go online and look at these things. They'll show at the beginning of the class, they'll say, draw a person. And 1 hour later, draw a person. And the difference is amazing. Many of you can draw. Students can do math. Students can give presentations. All these things a student says, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I can't do that. The concept is breaking it down and saying, how do we experience this and reflect on the experiences in a way we get better at it? Oh, one side note, this is my favorite. One student came up to me one time in class and said, hey, Dr. Z, I see you have a speech in here, and I cannot give presentations. I said, well, it's just 2 short presentations. She said, I can't do it. Can't give a presentation. I said, all right, I don't like to do this, and please don't tell any of your colleagues, but I won't require the presentation if you truly can't give it. She said, I can't. I said, well, I need more evidence than that. I'm busy right now. I have an office hour. This was a Tuesday. I have an office hour on Thursday. Come back, but I tell you, I'm so swamped right now. You'll have 2 minutes. And in 2 minutes, if you can convince me that you can't give a presentation, then I will relieve you of that obligation. Several of you are already smiling because you know exactly where I'm going on this. She showed up with flashcards. All right, Dr. Z, I cannot give a presentation because they make me terribly, terribly nervous. Sometimes I get so nervous that I feel like fainting. I black out. I'm not able to even convey my thoughts. I do so poorly that my colleagues think that I am stupid. And she went through these cards, and at the end of 2 minutes, she stopped and looked at me, and she said, there, that's my reason. I said, oh my gosh, that was absolutely fabulous argument for not giving presentations. And she still said, okay, so I don't have to give it, right? I said, no, that's an A. You've already got the first one done. Now, for the second presentation, what I recommend, she said something along the lines, oh, Dr. Z, you were such a fascinating and wonderful teacher. So working at these things. So the point here I want to make is getting better requires you to work. By the way, there's books out there about 10,000 hours and everything. Please do not ever tell your students it's going to take them 10,000 hours to be a professional. It will freak them out. Plus 10,000 hours is a ton of time. You get to it eventually. So number 1, you have to work at things, and we all have things we've already worked at. The baking and the photography and the problem solving and all of these kayaking and things are things we've worked at. We can share those with our students. There's some other things you can share with them, and the book kind of goes through this, so I don't want to spend much time on this. I got some other stuff that's not in the book. But there's some really good stuff about sleep. Wonderful research about sleep. Huge in formation of memories. There's a study out of Notre Dame, and actually there's another one out of Boston College, I believe it is, that's been shown that sleeping directly after learning can facilitate recall of information. If you learn new material and then take a nap, you learn new material and go to sleep for the night. Actually, there's some other research that shows learn the new material and go for a walk as long as it's a quiet place. They've done some studies looking at like taking a walk in the woods, like Central Park, versus walking down the street in Manhattan. And it turns out that Central Park is a very different physiological experience for you than walking down this main streets where you have to not be run over by cars and everything. So the concept here is somehow give your brain a chance to not interfere new material with other stuff you've learned. So it's hugely beneficial to take a quick nap after you've learned some materials. It also helps you organizing thoughts. Sleep also seems to reorganize memories, extracting emotional details and reconfiguring the memory to help us produce new and creative ideas. Creativity is aligned with sleep. But you know what's funny is university students will get so busy and so swamped with stuff, they'll stop sleeping. So they work really, really late, they get up early in the morning. There is a point at which your productivity drops that it would be better if you actually went to sleep for a while. The tricky spot's figuring out where that spot is. So sleep. We can talk to students about working at things. That was the first set. We can talk to them about sleeping. Actually, there's a NASA study I really like. I stuck this one up here. NASA randomly picked two groups of astronauts there, folks in training, and one group was allowed to take a nap, another group not trained to take a nap, and they were working on some computer functions. 34% increase in cognitive functioning hours later in the day from the napping astronauts. So taking the quick nap is huge. So for the rest of my time here, I think it's best if we just sleep. That's one possibility. All right. The other issue that's coming out right now, blue light. Anybody been reading this stuff about blue light? I love this. It's fascinating. Dangers of blue light and melatonin. Proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences found that screen time before bed can be detrimental in addition to poor cognitive functioning. Lack of sleep is related to obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular, actually they're starting to look now at even relationships to cancer. But the issue here is blue light can reduce the melatonin and cause us to not sleep as well. They're looking at areas now in emergency rooms. You see, when you look at fluorescent bulbs typically are either a blue spectrum light or a red spectrum light. The red lights are more warm kind of lights. Blue lights look like colder lights. And now with fluorescence, we're seeing this all over the place. So these more blue, coldish lights, these actually are blue lights. Look at that. I mean, you can see that's pretty cool. So you got blue lights are more cold spectrum. You could replace these bulbs with red spectrum lights, and they would look just a slight tinge of red. That wouldn't look as well in here because of the way it would bounce off the ceiling tiles, so people use different in different places. Where you'll really notice it is if somebody comes in and replaces one fluorescent bulb and accidentally gets the wrong spectrum. So you'll look up there and there'll be all these lights that look the same and one looks totally different. And oftentimes what happens is you might have a whole bank of blue lights and they come in with the red light and put it in. The red light does different things to your brain than the blue lights. The blue lights, though, you can find them in computers, you find them in televisions. So the people who will watch TV because you can't really sleep very well actually hinders the sleeping. A scary point is, and I put the little slide down there in the lower right-hand corner, babies now looking at readers. Because you put children's books on e-readers and let the babies flip through the e-readers. So we're going to have to take a look at this a little bit more, but the danger here is a person gets fatigued without realizing it. Because the human brain is wired in such a way that you can still do basic functioning, do things, but you're not able to do higher cognitive things. So you can be awake, your eyes can go across the chapters in the book, but you can't process the material. Fascinating stuff there. Exercise. We have all kinds of positive effects of exercise. Not only does it help with cognitive functioning, there's all kinds of reasons it helps with cognitive functioning, but it also does some other stuff, which is really pretty cool. It helps people to focus, to attend, it helps motivation, it helps patience. It's got wonderful side effects. So exercise is really good. So I'm just wanting to point out a couple of the things that as we're working with students that we can think, here's some stuff that can help out. Now, you can't actually have your students exercising and sleeping and changing out the light bulbs in your classroom and stuff. That's not how most of this works. But we can inform the students about these things. The last one I've got is actually hydration and nutrition together. Research now out there looking at things like mild dehydration. Even mild dehydration can show cognitive decrements of 10%. Keep in mind that you can drink substances and become dehydrated, right? If you drink diuretic substances. If you drink things like a Diet Pepsi, for myself, I like the Diet Pepsi. I have X amount of water I'm supposed to be drinking every day. If I drink a Diet Pepsi, I need X plus the compensation for the Diet Pepsi that I just drank. So I need to drink more water to compensate because that's a diuretic. If you're sitting at your computer for hours, 4 or 5 hours drinking Mountain Dew and typing at the computer, you actually can be dehydrating yourself. It's really kind of cool stuff. Oh, by the way, I forgot this too, is the drink that the person's holding, the cups get bigger and bigger. When Coca-Cola was introduced in bottles, they were 6-ounce bottles. Isn't that cool if you think about it? A 6-ounce bottle. They used to have a 24-ounce bottle that you could take home for your whole family to enjoy. It was the family-sized Coca-Cola, 24 ounces. These drinks, the Double Big Gulp and the Mega Drink from KFC, are 64 ounces. If you put regular Pepsi into that Mega Drink, or either one of those actually the same size, 800 calories that you're carrying around. Now, the Double Big Gulp, you got to do 2 hands because it's so big. The good news with the KFC, it has a handle. So it's got a plastic handle on it, and they don't do it anymore, but I actually found it. I found the advertisement. When it first came out, the Mega Drink, if you bought it for $2.99, you could add it to your meal, they would donate $1 to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund. And then food. Food's just kind of you got to watch what you're eating because the simple sugars can cause all kinds of roller coaster kind of actions. Get you really jazzed up for a little while, then you crash. So, drinking the Mountain Dew, eating the M&Ms and the Yoo-Hoo, the King Dongs and stuff, staying up all night typing, not exercising because we're behind schedule and all this other stuff, actually can put a person's brain in a position where it's really difficult to learn. Now, I spend a few minutes on that. That goes along with the book because those are all things that impact learning, and you can impact your students by giving them the information, helping them to understand those things. Day to day, what can you do in your classes? The first thing, of course, was that concept of helping them experience and see what's going on. But there's some other stuff we can do. You can make determinations on what you're going to do with respect to multitasking in your classroom. See, that's the other area that's kind of cool. Multitasking is a tricky, tricky thing. So I just want to tell you this really fast because there's so much misunderstanding about this. First thing you need to know is the students today cannot multitask any better than their grandparents could. And I say that instead of saying they can't multitask because there's people who run around telling you can't multitask. That's actually not true. You can multitask. However, not the way most people think. Multitasking would look a lot like this. So you see what I'm doing right now? Look at there. I am walking and talking at the same time. Now, if you think that's not really multitasking, think again. Because if you've got a youngster, for instance, my grandson Preston, when he started to walk, when kids first start to walk, what happens when they first start to walk and you say, oh, look at the big boy, you're walking? They do one of 2 things. They either fall or they freeze. It's like, look at you, you're walking. And then they'll look around the room, or they just fall. It's because they can't process language and walk at the same time. Most of us get better, right? So most of you can walk and talk at the same time. Now, here's the part that really becomes interesting. Higher cognitive functioning, things you have to really work at, you can never, ever get to a point where you can multitask 2 highly cognitive things. It feels like this. Let me show you how it feels. I'm going to give you a number. You count backwards by 3 as fast as you can in your own head because we're all different speed. But we want to use a highly cognitive task, counting backwards by 3 as fast as you can. And while you're doing that, I'll give you a separate task. But the most important thing is to keep counting backwards. That's your primary task. Then we're going to try to multitask on top of it. Okay? So let's start with a number of 133. Backwards by 3, go. In your own head. Backwards by 3, you keep counting as fast as you possibly can, and now we'll multitask. Keep counting because we're going to do 2 tasks. It's me counting, talking while you're doing. Here's how you spell Zakrajsek. It's Z-A-K-R. All right, so I'll stop right there because somebody's going to get hurt. That's a massively difficult thing to do because your brain's already occupied while you're trying to do a separate thing. In class, if I'm trying to learn while you teach me about macroeconomics or chemistry or biology or physics or humanities, we're talking about a Shakespeare play and the essence of the play, or we're looking at some writer and how he uses symbolism in a certain way, and while that's happening, I'm texting my friend, I am not multitasking, I am task shifting. I listen a little bit, I type a little bit. I listen a little bit, I type a little bit. While I'm typing, I'm not listening. Unless I'm typing something so stupid that I don't have to think about it. Most people are thinking while they're typing. So the point is you're task shifting back and forth. The problem is as I'm task shifting back and forth, I'm taking the snippets, and then what people do is they stitch together the snippets and then they put together a whole. It's kind of like how you see. See, the way actually the neuron information leaves your eyeball through an optic nerve here, we all have blind spots in each of our eyes. So our blind spots compensate for each other because they overlap. But if you close one eye and you look with just one eye, there's no way to compensate for the blind spot in that eye. And it's right about here, there's a hole where the nerve leaves the eyeball. You do not have receptors you can't see. But the really cool thing is if you close one eye, nobody sees a big black hole out there. And it's because the brain fills in the gap by what is seen around it. So as your head moves, and even if you hold it still, it kind of fills that area in. That's what's happening during class. If I'm texting and listening, I fill in the conversation of the class. In anything that I look down and type for a second, I look back in, I fill it in with the context of the conversation that's been happening. If I happen to look down, just as you as the teacher said, and don't forget about the test on Tuesday, and I look back up and you say, and the other thing we need to really keep in mind is with the paper being due, you'll want to watch that. Later, I would say to my friend, hey, by the way, when's the next test coming up? If my friend says, the teacher just says it's on Tuesday. Well, she never said that. And all of a sudden, I have no recollection of that thing. Now, if I said that the test is next Tuesday 4 times, all you have to do is hear it once. The other 3 times, you're covered. So when there's a lot of recursive discussion, it's okay to do both. That's why, by the way, texting and driving is the really bad idea. What the person's really doing is sampling. I told my kids when they started driving, my youngest one, I said, texting while driving is possible. You can certainly do it. But the way it actually works, it's a lot like driving with whenever you're texting, consider that equivalent to not be texting, but just close your eyes during that time. So what you're really doing is driving along like this. If I'm texting and driving and texting and driving, it's exactly the same as driving along going, oh, this is kind of cool. See, I can do this and I can drive. Straight level road or straight road going like this, I close my eyes for 5-6 seconds and open them back up again, and I'm still going down the road. Everything's cool unless something gets in front of you while your eyes are closed. So the issue here is you're jumping back and forth. That's why there's, I don't know if you saw the bumper sticker. It's one of my favorites. Honk if you love Jesus, text if you want to meet him. There's this concept that you jump back and forth and you're taking samples. So the point is in class, those samples are happening too. So what we want to do is watch out for this in class a lot. Now, and I typed this stuff up and I'm really apologizing because it's way too much text. It was meant for me more than you. This is by Clifford Nass at Stanford. He's studying texting during class. By the way, students are now self-reporting that they're texting throughout classes about 86% of the time. But here's the cool part. His research shows that multitaskers, it should say task shifters, are terrible at ignoring irrelevant information, terrible at keeping information ahead nicely and neatly, and they're terrible at switching from one task to another, yet they think they're good. Excuse me. Here's what's really neat. The more you actually text and go back and forth and text and walk and text and listen and do things, the worse you're getting at being able to focus at anything. See, here's what's really, really neat. Neat from a psychologist's point of view, absolutely hideous from a sociological point of view for our society. Just take what your brain does is practice, and it gets better and better at what it needs to do. So imagine for a second that I'm texting and talking to you, texting and talking, texting and talking. I'm going to look up specifically when there's something that draws my attention. One of the things that draws attention is at the end of questions, our voice tends to go up, right? You ever notice that? If you listen to conversations, you'll see that at the end. Probably not as frequently as you've noticed. You notice it more frequently now than you did before. But when you listen, all of a sudden, there's that thing at the end. And if next time you're texting and kind of pretending to listen to a significant other, watch when you look up. And what you will find is that you will be texting along, you go, what? And suddenly you realize you've just been asked a question. You have no clue what the question is. You just know it was a question. In class, the same thing can happen. So, Joe, what do you think about this? Oh, there's a different tone. You can recognize it, and you're typing away, and you think, oh, crud. You say, what do I think about what? And you know you're in trouble. So what you have to say is, I like it. You have to be careful. So the issue is, or there's silence. If you're talking to somebody, if you catch somebody who's texting while you're talking, just try this out. It's actually kind of fun. Is they're texting and talking to you, hey, so what are you going to do this weekend? You say, I'm thinking about maybe going down to the beach and just hanging out with my friends. They say, that's really cool. I was thinking about going down to the beach too. I might go down to the beach. And then you say, yeah, or I might hang out with my family. Oh, really? That's pretty neat too, my family, huh? They're just picking up a few words here and there, so they're going back and forth. But as they're doing this, they're just listening to certain words. They're training their brain to split their attention between these two things. This is the opposite from training your brain to focus. We're training our brains to not pay attention to one thing, to watch and scan the environment for other things. If I'm walking, I don't run into people because I keep glancing up, glancing down. I see where I need to be, but my brain's jumping back and forth all the time. This can get so bad. So there's a little cute things here. But before iPods, we used to call this the BlackBerry prayer, by the way, and like. So if you picture me sitting at a table in a chair, if I'm sitting at the table in a chair and I pull my device out and I go like this, and then look up again, it's kind of like that's where that comes from. But the concept here is this. So this was a research study that was done. Placed in front of a computer with internet access and a television with a remote. You got 30 minutes, and what you're going to do for the 30 minutes is just anytime you want, flip back and forth between the two things. Following the session, they asked the participants, how many times did you shift your attention? How many times did you look from one thing to the other thing? Now, we all know that the attentions these days, people like 10, 12 minutes, that's their attention span, which I don't believe at all. I think that's the attention span when you're talking to them about something they don't care about. If they're playing a video game, they can attend so long that they'll throw a clot if you don't convince them to stand up and move. But in class, if we say, oh, my students, I must mix up my class every 12 minutes or they get bored. They're bored because you're teaching them something they don't want to learn. What you need to do is think about teaching them in a way they want to learn it, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. But the fact here is, we'll come back to that in a second too. Following the session, people were asked how many times you shift your attention back and forth. The response was 15 times, which would be a 2-minute attention span. Now that seems bad enough, but that's self-reporting. And one thing psychologists know is that people are hideous at self-report. So you have to go to the videotape and see how many times they really looked back and forth. Well, that number was 120 on average. They spent an average of 6 seconds looking at a TV and 2 seconds looking at the computer. No, is that the other way around? 6 seconds on TV. Oh, computer 6 seconds and television 2 seconds. And if you think to yourself, jump back up here, how could you possibly divide your attention that much? So if I were texting somebody and talking to you, if you think about it, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1001, 1002, 1001. Getting to 10 would be hard for some people. So what we're doing now is we're actually getting to the spot where we're training it back and forth. So we have to be really careful with this because people think they're getting better and better. They're actually getting worse and worse at attending. The downside of this, I don't know, has this one ever happened to you? Okay. So here's the downside. This is, if you've ever found yourself not able to find your car, and this is kind of funny. I have my daughter. She's so funny. I got a daughter who's almost 20, and I gave her a copy of the book and asked her to read it. And first of all, I said, what'd you think of it? And she said, I felt like you were yelling at me the whole time. That was kind of funny. The other one was she came to a presentation I did recently, and I was talking about this and how not to lose your car again and why this happened. And then she told me a couple days later she always loses her car. She never told me that before. She said she spends all of her time looking for her car. She went to the mall, went into the mall, came out, walked right straight to her car. So it was really kind of cool to have that happen. Where this comes from is the same thing with the task shifting, multitasking kind of concept. We're dividing our attention so much right now. The way you learn anything is by attending to it. You have to attend to a stimulus or you can't learn it. Our brains are actually wired this way. So for instance, if I stood right here and just quickly looked at everybody and closed my eyes, for about a half a second I have an image of the whole room. But the human brain is set up in such a way that if you processed all that all the time, imagine just walking through life and all the stuff you'd process. How many ceiling tiles there are, how many lights there are, how many doors there are, how many whatever, how many people in the room. All of these things is too much. So what we do as we go through life is we go through and we find things that we want to attend to and we dismiss the rest. If I'm half listening to you while I'm texting and we're walking, the thing that might be dismissed is your whole conversation because I'm not really attending to that. Or the person I've texted, I may not pay attention to it enough. Later they'll say, hey, thanks for sending me the text about the new book, and you say, I don't remember that one. When you go to the mall, if it happens to be the holiday season and you're trying to buy the new hot toy and you circle around the mall for about 20 minutes looking for a place to park and you finally find a place to park and you jump out and now you're late meeting your friend and all this stuff is going on in your head, the reason you lose your car or you lose your car keys in your house or you lose your sunglasses and find them on top of your head later, or you read a chapter of your psych book and not only don't remember the psych book but also don't remember where the book is. All of those things happen because your brain's trying to do so many things that it's not processing the thing that you really need there. So when you jump out of your car and run inside, you come out and it's like, oh, nuts. Yep, don't remember where I parked. And then you have to start recreating it. I know I came through the JCPenney's because there was that just awful suit. So I remember that. And then you start recreating the best you can. But the issue is if you get out of your car and say, all right, I don't want to forget where this car is, and just stop and say, it's right here, you actually don't have to work any harder than that for the car. You have to work a little harder when you're learning new concepts in your physics class. But the point is, if you don't attend to it, it's gone. So getting the students to focus is just absolutely hideous to do at times, but it's really, really important. Same thing for ourselves. Okay. Now, phew. The other thing about teaching, this is where we really hit some of our stuff. We have to hit this delicate balance. When you got Ferris Bueller's Day Off and basically a person who's droning on about stuff and you really is boring, you've got the second guy who's going on, and we have all sounded like that at some point in our lives. It's so sophisticated that we haven't got any idea what's being talked about. Our job as teachers is somehow get right in that zone, right between those two. The learning actually happens somewhere between boredom and frustration. And the tricky spot we have is as you learn stuff, you know more things so you can get bored if you're teaching at the same level. So we're always changing that. Now the information that we have has to be brought up in such a way that the students are at the right level. So for instance, I went and Googled road signs because it's the same type of thing. When you make a road sign, the road sign has to be at the right level. So here's one, and you can't really read it, but let me just explain it to you or read it for you real quickly. Imagine you're driving along, and this road sign says, no person shall on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, the day preceding a public holiday or on a public holiday, drive or cause to be driven between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight a motor vehicle which exceeds 10.5 meters in length on all main roads. That was so totally written by a lawyer. Drive or cause to be driven. A police officer would say to you, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cite you for causing this vehicle to have been driven. So the idea here is that's the wrong amount of information. We come up with these road signs that are just amazing things. And of course, every intersection in the country has something that looks like this one. We just pile all this information in there. But when we're teaching, we do the same thing. We just pile all this information in there. And sometimes it makes no sense. Like, here's one that's got like the no left turn along with a left turn only. Here's one with bicycles, except it's got the big no sign, except bicycles are accepted, so it's kind of like the double negative. You may not come here except if you're on a bicycle, which means it's a one-way road coming at me, but I can ride into it as long as I stay in the bike lane. So we have this like convoluted way of getting somewhere. Somebody actually had to put that sign up there for the one-way sign here. And then my absolute favorite sign that I've run across, which I really, really like, is this not a through street. And it's evacuation route and not a through street. So as we're trying to figure out how do we get this information out there, there's so many interesting ways of doing this. Okay. Another issue that we come up with is, so while we're trying to sort all this stuff out, trying to figure out this concept here, is you got to keep in mind that most times actually we're not thinking about stuff. So this is a really, really important one for teaching any area. Why should I have to learn if I can just get it here? And the reason is that there's a big difference between thinking and recalling information. So here's the big deal. Once you learn information really, really well, you simply recall it. Until you've learned the information well, you have to think about it. It takes, and this is what's really cool now, it takes more energy to think than it does to recall. Much, much more efficient to just recall. Imagine what your life would look like if you had to think about everything. It would be absolutely hideous. Let me take a quick example for you. When you leave here today, you'd start out with, now where did I park? And you'd have to think about that. But then once you thought about where you parked and got to the parking lot, you'd have to say, now which car is mine? And then you would figure out which car was yours. Once you got in it, you would say, now how is it that I get this thing moving again? It should have a device which allows the engine to turn on. Oh, that's right, there's a key. And you'd pull out a key. Now where is it that this key goes? There should be an insertion point for this key. And then you can see how awful this would be. And instead what happens is you walk out the door with your friend, you pull out your key, you hit the button, you jump in, you put the key in, you turn it, you throw it into reverse, and you back out. There's no thinking at that point. In fact, if you want to see how complicated life can be with no thinking, take a Saturday morning when you're going to go to the store and buy some milk and eggs to make French toast for the kids, and you realize 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, you're sitting at the parking lot at the university. And if you happen to be sitting at the parking lot at the university thinking to yourself at that point, hey, I didn't want to come here, I wanted to go to the store. It's just where you went by automaticity. We do that kind of stuff a lot. If you ever catch yourself dialing 9 to get out from your home phone, then you've spent too much time calling from your office, but that's automaticity that's happening. So what happens is we have to recall certain things and we think about others. So when a student says, why should I have to learn this when I can look it up? Because looking it up is like that thinking process. If I'm teaching you classical conditioning and psychology, I cannot have you thinking to yourself, okay, an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. Now, what was the difference between those? That doesn't work if I'm trying to teach higher order conditioning. You have to know it. So when your students say, oh man, why do I have to know this? I could just look it up. Certain foundational things in every one of your disciplines you can't just look up. You could, but it will now allow any cognitive energies to be able to move forward. So you have to memorize it. One of my favorites now is when I teach like a learning class, or some class, we'll talk about Piaget. Not Piaget, we'll do Erikson's a good one. So talk about Erikson. Erikson's got stages of development, psychosocial development, and my students invariably, one of them will say, oh, we already covered, I learned that in intro class. Do I have to go over this again? And I love doing this. It's like, oh, whew. This is perfect because I'm really tired. I'm going to go ahead and sit down now, and why don't you go ahead and take this chunk since you've already learned it. And invariably the students will say, well, I didn't learn it that well. I say, okay, well now you're going to. So we're going to go through it again. We're going to teach each other. But the point is you can't just recognize a term. It's like flipping through the book and say, oh, I remember reading this chapter. Yeah, I saw that picture. Oh yeah, I remember this. You should be able to close the book and talk about it. So that's different from recall versus thinking. Now I got some tasks. I've been talking way too much. If you can't see this, you got to get to an area where you can see the screens here. So here's the task for you. Please, I'm begging you, do not look up a penny from your iPhones. Don't Google a penny. Don't talk to your neighbor. Don't pull one out. This task is designed to be from memory. From memory, look at these 15 representations of pennies and identify the one that you believe comes closest to the real U.S. penny. As I ask you which coin, I'm going to go through the letters of the alphabet. Please be proud of your response. Don't look around and say, oh, I wonder if anybody else picked that coin. Just be proud of your response and let's go with it. So how many of you like A? Excellent. How many B's? C's. D's. Excellent. E's. A couple E's. Good. F's. No F's. G's. Lots of G's. H's. Excellent. I's. Very good. J's. Excellent. K's. Good. L's. Lots of L's. M's. Good. N's. Got a couple N's. Good. O's. AO's. Anybody think it's none of the above? Good for you, because it is one of these. Except I was told by someone just recently, as they said, actually several years ago, said, it is none of the above because you said which one's the real U.S. penny, and these, none of them are real U.S. pennies. They are only representations of pennies. It was close to a lawyer. What's the undergraduate degree to go to law school? No, it's philosophy. That's a philosophy. It was a philosopher, which, as we all know, philosophers are just psychologists without data. Now, I can tell right now which one of you are philosophers. No, okay, so here we go. 11 different coins. You just picked 11 different coins out of something that you have looked at thousands and thousands of times. Actually, I'll email this whole presentation. Meg, I'll send it to Meg probably, or to Michael. We'll send it to somebody so you can have it. I use this in my classes because I talk to my students and say, which one is the real U.S. penny? They talk about it a little bit. I don't have time to do it now. You can form small groups. Which one do you think it is? Then they'll argue about which one it is if they don't actually look it up. All over something they've looked at thousands of times. Mere repetition won't get it into long-term memory. The other cool thing is if I took a handful of U.S. coins and tossed them out on a table and said how many pennies, everybody in here could pick the number just like that. You know a penny when you see one. But this is what's really important. What do you need to know that something is a penny? What attributes do you need? Yes, you need the size, basically probably the size, but what you really need is brown. You need to know the color. That's all you need. Here's something that's probably the most important thing of the day. The way the human brain works, once you've processed enough information to know what something is, you should stop. If you don't, you are OCD. You process and process and process and process. So it can be, there's a fine line between these two characteristics. But if you think about this room right here, here's one for you. Make sure you look right up here, right now. Look right here. Do not turn around. Just look right here. How many times does the sign exit appear in this room? Most people don't know. See, some people can't even help themselves from turning around. All right, you can turn around if it's actually going to hurt you not to. But there's 3 up there. I don't know if there's any of the rest. No, okay, good. I could ask how many fire alarms there were. There's a lot of stuff around here you don't process because that would be stupid. If you came in and said, there's like 706, I'm making the number up. There's 716 tiles in this room. That's a lot of tiles, isn't it? You say, wow, well, there wouldn't be that many, but, well, there's quite a few. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you counted all the tiles, if you counted all of the acoustic tiles along the side, if you counted how many times the pattern repeated itself, you count how many chairs, how many tables, how many plates, you could count a lot of stuff. And your colleagues would say, my, that's a lot of information. So what you do instead is you walk in the room, you find out where the speaker's going to be, where the screen's going to be, where's the back of the room, I want to sit by the back in case it's boring. You sort this all out real quickly, and then you move on. When I try to teach you what classical, I'm sorry, I'm a psychologist, so I have to do this. If I try to teach you differentiation between classical and operant conditioning, and as soon as you say, got it, you're done. Unless when I'm teaching, I start to show you the details. Because experts see details. They see what actually is going on in there, and they see how things come together. That's, by the way, also why you can find something fascinating and your students can find it absolutely boring. If they don't know the details you know, they don't know the systems and how it fits together like you do, what they see is, yeah, it's this big, it's copper, and you're still talking. So to them, it just feels like a lot of redundancy they don't need. So you have to kind of point out, this is why we're looking at the details. Now, which one is not important? The concept is important. All right, let me try this real quickly. How many of you want to know which is the real penny? Raise your hand. That's not even half of you, so let's move on. Here's the other little task I can show you real quickly and I didn't even have you talk together, but I did have you turn to your neighbor real quickly and say which penny it was, and I did that so that when I asked you to raise your hand, you were committed. See how sneaky that one was? Because you couldn't sit there and say, I'm going to wait for the popular one because I just got done telling somebody L. So if I see a lot of hands going up for G, I can't say G because my neighbor would look at me and say, hey, you didn't say that, you said L. So you kind of got caught there for a minute. The other thing is, because you made a commitment and picked a penny, had I just told you what it was at the beginning, you'd be less interested, but now you're kind of interested. So actually, I don't have time to play around with this too much, but A is the right answer. It's right there at the beginning, A. You weren't supposed to Google it. I said don't Google it. How do you know it's after? It could still be in, that's sad. All right. So the fact that you like the fact that you got that right because some of the people said yes. By the way, one of the tasks you knew was the classroom. If you do this in class, do it this way. Show the pennies, then ask how many A's, how many B's, how many C's, do that. And then you can say, that's because only about 10% of the population gets it right. Mere repetition in this class will not get stuff in long-term memory. You'll have to work at details, and you have to look at the nuances. In this class, this big in copper is not big enough. But I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is yet. To get to the right answer, let's try something else. And you put people in tables and say, you've got 5 minutes to come to consensus. Actually, 3 minutes is enough. 3 minutes to come to consensus. The whole table has to pick a coin. I have had classes with 24 students with nobody picking A, maybe 1 or 2 at the most. And at the end of small groups, the entire room picked A. Because the people will get around the table and they'll say, well, I think it could be G or A, but I know it's not the others. And somebody else says, well, it could be L, and I kind of like A, but I know it's not G. And they pull their information together. At other times, just be aware that there are times when my class will end up with all wrong answers. So then I like to point out that group work doesn't mean you get to a right answer. It means you talk about issues and you reduce variability. But they don't always get that one. The reason I bring this up, though, is I love, because of my personality, to say to the group, after they've done the group work, say, G is the right answer. Sometimes I do it in here, but I didn't this time. G is the right answer, and you always get somebody, and I pick whatever one was the most popular. Wait till you see most of the hands. And especially if there's conversations and you say G's the right answer, you'll get somebody who will jump up and say to their friends, I told you it was G. I told you. They're like, oh, this is going to be ugly. And then you wait a second, and somebody will dig out a penny, or they'll use their iPad and find a penny, and they'll say, wait a minute, G's not the right answer, A is. And you say, oh, I'm so embarrassed. You're right, it's A. And then look right at the person who made the big deal out of having it right because it was G. And they usually slink off to the side then. The reason I point this out is that certain people have to know confirmation. They'll dig for their pockets for the penny and stuff. They say, I got to know. I can't just trust you. Other people's like, that's good. I got it. Anyway, it's an interesting task for class. The dopamine aspect here, by the way, just to let you know, there are neurotransmitters we have in the brain that actually drive us. We like to succeed at things. But here's a really cool concept. Think about this for how the brain works. What if you had no neurotransmitters, no physiological response to success? That wouldn't be very adaptive for survival. If I succeed at something, it should raise my interest level. It should make me excited about that. Oh, I found water. Ooh, here's food we can eat. I beat you at that game. All of these things can come down to the spot of, in matter of getting better and doing things, there should be a physiological response to doing well. Some of you have it way more than others. The highly competitive people will have it, but everybody has it to some extent. Even people who say, I am not competitive at all. I do not care. I want us all to win together. Still, now don't be shaking your head, because we're still winning together. You still feel good when the group wins. So there is this physiological mechanism for success. If we didn't have that, whenever we would succeed at something, people would look at it and say, yeah, okay, so we succeeded. Oh, yeah, there's water. I guess we'll drink it. Oh, food. I was really hungry. I guess I'll eat it. It really wouldn't work well. So we have this thing. So the point that I bring it up, the reason I bring it up, is in the classroom you can do that. You can actually create games out of things. Try to get the students to figure things out. What do you think the next finding is going to be? I like putting findings up, and instead of drawing off the graph, I'll say, take just a minute or two, draw off what you think the results are going to look like, share it with your friends, talk it through, come to a consensus, and then we go and I show it up there, and the students wouldn't even let me, just like you said on this last penny thing. It's, you can't just move on. It's like, whoa, what's the answer? What is it? And sometimes the answer is, we don't know, which really drives them nuts. But to say, we don't know, but what have you guys talked about? And then they tell me what they've talked about. And I said, you know what? That's really good. And why might that be? I'd never heard that before. And there's your win. So turning it into a game is different from just saying, here's the results. Another thing we could get out of this, which is pretty cool, is how we learn things. And it's really neat how the stuff is working out now. Is part of it is we're finding out there's a difference between encoding and retrieval. You see, if I read a chapter 4 times, I've encoded something 4 times, but I haven't retrieved it at all. And if you think of the information you learn, what you really need is it for it to be retrieved. You need the information. You don't just need it in there. What value is it to have it in here if you never ever use it? So we put stuff in there for the express purpose of getting it out eventually. What happens, and we found this out, and I'll show you this quick study. I'll do this one first. I'll come back to the argument here then. So in this particular study, is the first group, the SSSS group. They looked at a paragraph of material and they studied it 4 times. I read it again, I read it again, I read it again. Then 5 minutes later, take a quiz, and I get 83% right. Different group. Read it once, read it second time, read it third time, take a practice quiz, get no feedback, and then a few minutes later, take the quiz that we're going to count 5 minutes later, and that group gets about 78% right. The next group, they read the paragraph 1 time, take a quiz, no feedback, take another quiz, no feedback. See, if you got feedback, it'd be like processing more stuff coming in. So take another quiz and no feedback, so nothing's going in, it's only coming out with the practice quizzes, and that group scores about 73%. Now here's something we're finding over and over and over again with all kinds of studies coming out. Huge difference between right after you study something and a week later. So a week later, the group that was the study group ends up down around 43%. They've lost half of all the material. What's really cool is the other 2 groups. The group that studied once and had 3 feedback or not feedbacks, 3 times they've pulled the information out, actually the decrement goes down from about 73-ish down to the mid-60s. It's barely a significant even drop, but it's massively significantly higher than the first group for the recall a week later. This has been replicated several times. It's been done in many, many different realms. It's a whole new thing out there called the testing effect. And the testing effect is really interesting because when I first started teaching, we used to talk about the fact that certain countries would give a final exam and that's all they would do, and they didn't test all the time. And in the States, we just tested people all the time. And the idea was maybe we shouldn't test so much. It's interesting that 30 years later, they would do the research that would come out and say, actually, the testing helps you retrieve the information. The first president of the United States, if you've got that right there that fast, if you think about it, how many times you've actually said the name and pulled the information out over and over and over again. Plus, there's a great elaborative network for Washington. But the concept is that you push it out all the time. Getting students to actually talk and reproduce answers is massively helpful for them to recall the stuff later. If you think about why active learning is important, why is it helpful to do active learning? Part of it is you get different perspectives. But part of it is every time you talk about something, you're retrieving the information. And that retrieval process is what helps you strengthen it. By the way, a quick side note on this disordinal interaction we see, cramming for exams. If you ask your students, you got 5 days before an exam and you can devote 10 hours to study. Is it better to do 2 hours a night for 5 nights? Or is it better to study for 10 hours the night before? If you ask the students, I'm telling you I've done this in campuses all over the country, they will universally say 5 nights is better than cramming. They know they shouldn't cram. And then you say, which do you do? And the teacher's not in the room, they all cram. And if you say to yourself, why is it that they keep cramming when they know they shouldn't? It's one of the most insidious things about academia. Research is showing that they tend to score higher on an exam if they cram for it than they have distributed learning. Cramming will get you a higher test score immediately. You wait a week later, the crammed material is all gone. The stuff that you've studied across the 5 nights, it's almost the exact same type of thing here. You'll notice that the study test for the immediate test was the lowest of the 3. It was the highest of the 3 a week later. Cramming is hideous later, but it's good now. It's a whole lot like a big fudge brownie with a scoop of ice cream on it. It's really good now, it's just bad for you later. So that's where we get into that situation where it's kind of a funny action. By the way, before I forget, don't raise your hand. Anybody who has a policy that says if you have at least a B average or if you have an A average, you don't have to take the comprehensive final? Keep in mind that one concept we've got now is if I crammed for 4 of your tests and got A's on all 4 tests, I may not know anything for the comprehensive final. So I'm glad you're not making me take it. But if your assumption is because you've already demonstrated A-level work all along so you don't have to take the comprehensive, this is one the students don't like me to tell people, it might be a good idea for you to have them do the comprehensive final next semester and see how that works out. They'll still do well, they tend to, but they'll go back and work really hard to do well on the comprehensive final. So it's just a kind of a cool thing. By the way, my calc exams, these are not exact numbers, but they're close. We had 4 exams and a comprehensive final, and I got approximately, it was a quarter system, so it's 10 weeks long, test every 2 weeks. I got approximately like an 87%, a 91%, an 85%, a 93%, came to the comprehensive final, and I got like a 45%. What I figured out is I could learn 2 weeks worth of calculus in a night, but I couldn't learn a quarter's worth in a night. And I had to relearn the whole thing, and it was gone. So that whole process of relearning, it's really, really important. Okay. Whew. So I wrote a chapter just recently about, think about all of the stuff you have to do as a faculty member. So I'm going to ask you to participate here for just a second here. Oh, good. Got just a few more minutes. Think about everything you have to do as a faculty member. I'm going to try this really, really fast. Everything you have to do as a faculty member. Okay, got it? So now I'm just going to ask you for some of this. As a faculty member, what are some of the things you have to do? So it's just some, what do you got?
Grade papers.
Is it what?
Grade papers.
Grade papers, perfect. Grading papers is one of them.
Plan.
What's it? Plan. You got to plan out the whole semester. So planning the semester, grading papers, what other kind of stuff you do? Is the what? Prepare? Prepare a lecture. And I'm going to throw in there, you've prepared a lecture, now you got to deliver a performance in front of your class. Okay, so you prepare the lecture and you have to deliver it. A couple of others?
Serve on committees.
Serve on committees. So you actually have to not only serve on the committees, you may have to chair the committees, which means you have to wrangle a whole bunch of other people for which you have responsibility and you have no accountability.
I'm terrible at that.
Yeah, he's hideous. Don't ever ask him to chair a committee. Professional development, advising, sitting down and talking to somebody about what their future is going to look like. Anybody in here do marriage counseling? All right. How about just life counseling, right? I actually tried this, and I don't want to do it today because I got a task I want you to try here in just a second. But I asked groups to, as a table, come up with something that you think that you've had to do that you think nobody else in the room has had to do. And one of them came up with is, I have to do marriage counseling. And somebody else in the room says, oh yeah, I do that too. And I'm not talking about specific marriage counseling. You're sitting in your office and you've got a student that says, I'm just in this terrible relationship. Okay, great. I didn't want to have this conversation. And some of you are smart enough to say, can't go down that road. But the problem is we have to do this. Giving really, really bad news. The stuff like, I know you want to be a psychologist, but it's just not going to work out. Why don't we look at something easier like sociology? Well, I can't send them off to chemistry. We all know that's just impossibly hard because I couldn't do it. Chemistry was very important in me becoming a psychologist. But we basically, when we're talking to them and saying, here's something I don't think. We had a policy at Southern Oregon. You could take a class 3 times and you may not sign up for it a 4th time. Statistics is a course I taught. Students would take it. If you flunk it 3 times, you couldn't sign up a 4th time. When you can't sign up for the class the 4th time, it's a bit of a problem if it's a required course. The point is, you can't get that major. You flunk a required course 3 times, you're out of the major. It's responsible. Because other times, I actually helped get the policy through. We had students who would take statistics 6 and 7 times trying to pass it so they could be a psych major. You know what happens while you're trying to take it 6 and 7 times? Time goes on. You've got students who've been at the school for 8 years, mostly because they can't pass statistics. There comes a point when you say, you know what? Statistics, if it's a required course for a reason and you can't pass it, we have an issue here. Can't pass biology? Bit of a problem. Okay, so all of those different things, I want to point this out real quickly because here's what's really cool. You have all these things you're asked to do and we're not trained how to do them. I was never trained how to grade papers. I was never trained how to grade presentations. So it occurred to me, other people were. So you've got around you colleagues who are trained to do the things that you're asked to do. And I use that I just really like to point that out to folks, because if you're struggling with any aspect of being a teacher, look around and say to yourself, who might actually have disciplinary training in this? So one of mine was my class. I thought to myself one day, I was preparing for my class, and I thought, I've never been actually taught to be a public speaker, and that's part of being in a classroom. So I went and found people who were in the speech and communication department and said, what do I need to do to really get my students interested in this material? And the speech and communication people could tell me how it is you write a speech or deliver a speech where you can hook people at the beginning. Because if I could hook my class at the beginning, I'd have them. So the point here is looking around for the colleagues that can do this. So the biggest thing that my speech communication people told me was attention grabber. What can you do at the beginning of a class to actually draw in their attention? Now, drawing in attention is really, really important here. So I got just enough time. I got to try this thing because it was creating excitement in the classroom. Oh, we can do it, but we got to move fast. So at your tables. Now, if you only have 2 people, I've been talking way too much, and I apologize for that. If you only got like 2 people at the table, you're going to have to scooch over. Ideally, you want at least 4 people at the table, and somebody's got to take notes. Okay? So somebody's going to be the note taker. Here we go. Oh, I got to get a timer going here. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. This is going to be okay. Here's what I'd like you to do in the 60 seconds. In the 60 seconds, let's see how I want to do this one. As many ways as you can come up with as a group of how can you get attention of students. What could you do to draw in the attention of students, right? That's the task. How many different ways, whatever you could do. It could be for any class, any discipline. You could say, well, in my class, I do this. So we're trying to come up with as many as we can in 60 seconds. On your mark, get set, go. All right, so here's what we're going to do next, is that I need somebody to report out for the group, so everybody has a piece of paper in their hands. You can put it to somebody else if you want for a reporter-outer. So because I got to move kind of fast here. Okay, whoever's now currently hold it, pass it 2 people to your left. I like to do that periodically because otherwise, no, you got to pass it along, you got to pass it along. It goes all the way to the left. That'd be 1 to your right, same 2 to the left. Okay, that's good. And I like to do that in my classes because otherwise the extroverts always get to talk. So, and the difference between introverts and extroverts. Introverts, individuals who want to process things and think about them. Extroverts are those individuals that begin sentences, curious how they might end. So here's what I'm going to do next. Don't worry if you don't like reporting out. I'm just going to go through and ask you one thing off the list, and we're going to move really, really fast so you're done in a matter of seconds. So what's like one thing from your list? Magic tricks. Excellent. How about you guys? Show a video. A clip of video is good. One from you guys? Air horn. There you go. An air horn's good. One from you guys?
Tell them there's a test tomorrow.
Tell them there's a test over it tomorrow. Yes? Candy. Okay, good. We've got candy. Another one here. Dance. There you go. You could dance. Yes? A quick anecdote or a funny story. How about you guys? Oh, ask someone what they learned from the previous class. Okay, that's good. Now, I've been to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you don't have any unique things on the list, that's okay, but we're going to go as far as we can with unique items here. How about another one over here? Wear a crazy hat. Another one? Music is good. How about you guys? Make a mistake, a purposeful mistake, and have them catch it. Yes? Another one over here? Okay, you can say this is worth credit or extra credit. Yes, another one here. Play a game of some kind. Okay, that's good. Another one here.
Start out with a joke.
Start with a joke. Excellent. How about you guys? Some kind of a group activity. Get into a group. That's good. How about you guys? Okay, dress up like the content unless, well, most times. I don't even know where I was going to go with that, but there's some content I get worried about. Okay, another one here. Oh, give a real-life application to something. That's good. How about you guys?
Anything involving their phones, Googling an
Oh,
answer.
yeah.
Texting an answer to a problem.
A quick web quest or something. You could say, hey, go find something. That's really good. How about you guys? Another one? The which? A cartoon. Excellent. Good one. Yes?
Show a sexy, violent, or bizarre image.
Show a sexy, violent, or bizarre image. There you go. While dressed up like the content. This is good. Another one. Did you have a separate one back here? Oh, just asking them to stand up. All right. I want to point something out real quickly. Every table had a unique one, which was pretty cool. And we ended up with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 6, 7, 28, 29, about 30. There's about 30 tables. We just got about 30 ideas out of the room, which is pretty cool. But from the moment I said you have 60 seconds, go, that was 4 minutes and 17 seconds ago. The concept of I would do some activities, I would do something in the classroom, but I don't have time. There's so much content. There's certain things I could have stopped that halfway through and still made a pretty good point. We could have moved on from there. 2 or 3 minutes is all it takes. It's really kind of cool. The other thing, though, that I want to point out is you notice I didn't have a table read off. So what were your items? And then do you have any to add? We would have been done reporting out by the time we got here. It's 1 item per table. But mostly what I wanted to get out of this, too, is you have a lot of neat ideas. Every class you walk into, if you say to yourself, what am I going to do on this particular class to hook the students? It doesn't have to be dancing and doing anything crazy. Sometimes it's a direct application. If it's a YouTube clip, you know what I found out recently? My students can do most of my work for me. Now, I end up doing plenty, so it's not like I'm not doing anything. But YouTube clips, I now give my students extra credit or even credit. Everybody in the class, if you were my class, I've had classes up to 200. Everybody in class has to come up with at least 1 YouTube clip. And it has to be before the material is covered and you send it to me and explain why you picked that clip. I got some of the most amazing clips. And I don't worry about relevancy because I'm a little bit older than my students, because my students are the ones getting it. We could start with music. I'm going to start with music, and I want to have music that somehow pertains to the concept, or for some reason you think it fits with the content, whatever the content is. You send it to me, send me that, I can look it up real quickly, or you come by my office at office hour and play it. And there's things that I can do to help draw interest. Yeah, 5 minutes is easy. I can. You know what's weird about classical conditioning? You don't actually have to be taught it. You just learn it. I need to borrow a pen here since I only got a couple minutes left. Oh, thank you. That would be great. So the neat thing is that it just comes about without actually being explained it or anything else. Oh, yeah, you'll do just fine. If you blow up a balloon and look around the class, you find at least one person who looks very uncomfortable. She's right here. See, you can tell by looking at her, she's not happy right now. I'll move back away. But here's the other part. I want you all to just physiologically clear your minds and think. Just clear your minds and attend to your body in terms of just attune to it here and watch what happens. Anybody feel something? Just raise your hand really fast if you did. Look around the room. All the way back to the ends. The reason I just brought this up, I was guest lecturing in a class of 400 students, and the instructor once said one of the issues is that the students are always on their devices and not paying attention. I came in to cover classical conditioning or talk a little bit about it. I blew up a balloon and I did that. 400 students sitting in the room staring at me. Hey, an ADD dude with a balloon. See what's going to go on? So the issue here is my old way of teaching classical conditioning was to stand up and say unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus. Oh, how boring is that? Now I bring this in and I said, hey, everybody, you just felt it tense up, right? Now, here's the deal. Well, that was uneventful. Get into small groups. Don't do it now, but get into small groups and explain why your stomach tensed when that happened. And then I would walk around and we would talk about it. So the point is there's ways of doing the class where it's different. But the biggest thing is, we're going to finish with this, perfect timing here. There's a concept called social contagion. Cognitive neuroscience has got some really cool stuff. Social neuroscience has got some really neat stuff. The Society for Study of Social Neuroscience is only about 5 years old. This is some brand new stuff. Cognitive neuroscience looks at how our brain changes as a result of learning. Social neuroscience looks at how we physiologically impact one another. We're social creatures. We're social beings. We're pack animals. We work together. It's what we do. But doing that means we have to be wired in a way, this is what I find most fascinating, we have to be wired differently than if we were we lived in isolation, if we were solitary creatures. Cats and dogs don't have the same brain physiology. They're wired differently because you got pack animals and you've got more independent animals. So we're we're social animals is what we are. If that's true, then our physiology should change as we're interacting with each other. So if I walk up to you and say, hey, I just found $20, and you say, oh, well, that's nice, and I say, what's wrong? You say, oh, my mom's really, really sick. She's just so sick. They say, wow, that stinks for her, but I got $20. That conversation, we wouldn't be able to talk for very long. But if I'm up here with my $20 and you're here with your mom and I say, oh, that sounds terrible, I've just dropped my affect. I'm starting to talk to you, you feel a little bit better. We're never going to be equal because you got a sick mom and I just found $20. But the point is, we get to a point where we can talk. That happens all the time, and if you watch it, it will happen in your life. Sometimes when you leave and go home, you say, I am so exhausted. It's because you were up here, your students were here, and you worked really hard to move them up. So what you can do is you find activities, you find small group works, you find ways for them to generate some interest and interest in the classroom, excitement in the classroom, and their affect level comes up, and it gets closer to where you're at, and it's a little less exhausting. The balloon works well for classical conditioning. You don't blow up a balloon just because it's fun to do. You come up with a reason why this material is so cool, and then get your students involved with this. Anybody who says, oh, my students don't want to learn these days, that's so untrue. Boredom is the worst thing for the human brain. I mean, that's why we put people in isolation. It's the biggest penalty you can pretty much do. The students want to learn. It just maybe they don't want to learn what you're teaching. Part of what they may not want to learn what you're teaching is if we ever use phrases like, oh, this will be important sometime in the future. Or, yeah, this next chapter is kind of boring, but we have to get through it to get to the more important stuff. Anything like that is basically telling the students, just don't, it's not bad. So you don't have to jump around and run all over the place, but you have to care, and that's that social contagion part. And what we have found, if you watch movies, comedies in the presence of other people, we rate them as being funnier. If we watch sad movies in the presence of others, we rate them as being sadder. We draw from one another. So I just typed in, by the way, it's just happiness kind of stuff, and I typed in sad puppy, and that's my sad puppy. So, wrapping up here. At the beginnings, we talked a little bit about the drawing and the fact that we have to tie things in. People have to experience, work at stuff, and experience with reflection to get it. The penny is showing basically that we have to keep working at stuff even though our brain may say, I'm good, I'm done. No, this big in copper is not good enough in here. Just mere repetition is certainly not going to do it. Social contagion, figuring out how do you draw energy and bring it up. The idea of attention getters, how are you going to get people and bring them into just sharing the information? How do you share the right amount of information? You don't want too much, you don't want too little. So it's really kind of a cool thing to do. But overall, if you enjoy what you're doing and work at teaching and think about how to work at teaching and then help your colleagues and have them help you, then life looks a whole lot better at the teaching part. I've hit my time. Now the good news is I almost always go 5 minutes over. I've actually gone 3 minutes over, so I'm ending 2 minutes early. It's the math. I'm around for the next hour or so. If anybody does have questions, you can ask, but I don't want to, I've never been a big fan of people asking a lot of questions toward the end because it seems like there's a few people who have questions and the other people just want to stand up and get out of the room for a little bit of a break. So hang around if you do have questions or catch me a little bit, but otherwise we should get moving. So I'm going to stop there.